The morning started like any other, with a slow, familiar rhythm. The radio hummed softly, just loud enough to cut through the silence of my small kitchen. The coffee was strong, black, and I had a moment to myself before the world started demanding things. I hadn't heard from Rachel in a few days, and I had almost come to expect that. I didn't mind the silence, though life had been quieter since Martha passed. The apartment was mine, in a way that it never had been when she was here. I had my routines, nothing fancy, just the mundane patterns of a man who had learned to live with solitude. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. But then the phone rang. It was Richard. The phone call alone was enough to send a spike of tension through my body. Richard never called. Ever. Our communication had always been filtered through Rachel, a delicate dance of politeness between him and I. But when his name appeared on the screen, I knew something had changed. I let it ring once more before answering. Hello? Richard. The words felt heavier than usual. Mason, he began, his tone as stiff as I expected. It's about Serenity's birthday dinner tonight. I blinked, trying to shake the fog of sleep from my mind. Serenity Thompson, Rachel's mother-in-law, the woman who, over the years, had made it abundantly clear that I wasn't part of her world. I hadn't been invited to many of their family gatherings. Maybe none, except the ones Rachel begged me to attend. And even then, I felt like an outsider. But tonight felt different. Okay, I said cautiously, unsure of where this was going. Well, Rachel insists that you come, Richard said, his voice tinged with reluctance. Families all gathering tonight at Worthington Hills Country Club. The name itself felt like a wall. Worthington Hills. I'd heard enough to know that it wasn't a place where people like me belonged. People like me, the kind who worked with their hands, who wore worn shirts and lived in small apartments, the kind who didn't fit into the glossy, polished world that Richard and Serenity thrived in. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I don't know if I have anything appropriate to wear, I admitted. I hadn't worn a suit in years, let alone anything that could be considered business casual by their standards. But Richard didn't seem to care about my hesitations. Well, it's a business casual event, Richard said quickly, as if it was a transaction that could be handled without much thought. Just don't embarrass Rachel. I let his words settle in the silence between us. I'll be there, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. The phone call ended quickly after that, leaving me with nothing but the quiet hum of my apartment. I stared at the phone for a moment, as if I could somehow extract more meaning from those brief words. Don't embarrass Rachel. The words echoed in my mind, adding weight to the moment. It wasn't just about going to some birthday dinner. It was about meeting their expectations, stepping into their world, and showing them that I could belong. I stood up slowly, my hands still gripping the phone. Worthington Hills. Business casual. A new chapter, it seemed, was being written for me, one I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But for Rachel, I would try. I turned to the closet, staring at my clothes, the ones that had become my uniform over the years. And somehow, in that moment, they didn't feel like enough. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closet. The familiar navy blue dress shirt hung there, soft from years of use, its fabric worn in places from countless washes. It was my go-to for any occasion where I had to look presentable. But it felt like it wasn't enough. Worthington Hills was a different world. A world where my work pants and worn shirts wouldn't pass the test. I thought about the people who would be there, Richard, Serenity, and the guests, People who wore their wealth like a badge, whose polished shoes and crisp suits seemed as natural as breathing. I wasn't like them, and I didn't know how to become like them. I grabbed the shirt from the hanger, holding it up to the light, the faded blue, the creases that never quite came out. I was no stranger to hard work, to getting my hands dirty. But this felt different. The world I was stepping into tonight wasn't one where authenticity or skill mattered. It was about appearances, about fitting in with people who valued the right brand of suit and the right cocktail in hand. I took a deep breath and laid the shirt down on the bed, then looked at the shoes lined up under the closet. Worn, but comfortable. A small part of me wanted to keep them, to show up as I was, to let them see that I wasn't going to play their game. But another part, the part that still cared for Rachel and wanted to make this night work for her, knew I had to at least try. For her, I picked out a pair of brown leather shoes, polished them the best I could, and slipped on the navy shirt, adjusting the collar that never seemed to sit just right. I looked at myself in the mirror, trying to ignore the awkwardness, trying to ignore the fact that the person staring back at me didn't quite fit the role I was about to play. I wasn't sure if I was trying to please them or if I was trying to prove something to myself. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before, urging me to leave. I grabbed the gift bag from the counter, a silver picture frame, wrapped carefully. The kind of thing that seemed fitting enough for Serenity's birthday. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. The thought crossed my mind that it would probably be dismissed just like I would be. I locked the door behind me, making my way to the car. The drive felt longer than it should. I knew Rachel would be there, and that was enough to keep me going. But the closer I got to Worthington Hills, the more the knot in my stomach tightened. The grand entrance of the country club loomed ahead, its manicured grounds and sparkling lights, almost mocking my tired car and my modest appearance. As I parked the Toyota between two luxury cars, the contrast between my world and theirs felt undeniable. I stood outside the car for a moment, the weight of everything sinking in. I wasn't just showing up to celebrate Serenity's birthday. I was stepping into a world that had never truly accepted me. A world I'd been hesitant to enter for years. But tonight was different. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for Rachel. And as I stood there in the cold, adjusting my jacket, I promised myself one thing, no matter what happened tonight. I would walk in with my head held high. I was more than my clothes, more than the judgment they would pass on me, and that would have to be enough. As I stepped out of the car, the cool evening air hit my face, sending a chill down my spine. The elegance of the Worthington Hills Country Club was palpable, from the perfectly manicured lawns to the gleaming windows reflecting the soft light of the setting sun. It all felt like a foreign world, one I'd never quite fit into. The sound of my boots against the pavement felt too loud in this silence of wealth. As I adjusted my collar one last time, I tried to shove aside the feeling of inadequacy that gnawed at me. I could hear voices in the distance. Laughter mingled with the clink of glasses. The world inside those grand walls wasn't made for people like me, people who spent their days working with their hands, fixing things, helping others without thinking twice. But tonight, I wasn't here to prove myself to anyone except Rachel. If this was important to her, I was going to show up. As I walked towards the entrance, the door swung open before I could even reach for the handle. A tall, sharply dressed man with perfectly combed hair greeted me with a polite but distant smile. "Mr. Thompson's guest?" he asked, his voice almost too smooth, like he'd said the same thing 1,000 times. I nodded, clutching the gift bag more tightly, as if it could somehow give me the confidence I was lacking. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of fine food and polished silver. The dining area was filled with laughter and conversation, though the moment I entered, Everything seemed to pause for a second. I could feel eyes on me, not the kind of warm welcome I was used to, but the scrutinizing glance of people who had already sized me up and found me lacking. "Donald, you made it," Rachel's voice cut through the stillness, and my heart leapt at the sight of her. There was a moment of warmth in her smile, but it quickly faltered when she saw me standing there, still looking out of place in my worn shirt and scuffed shoes. She moved quickly toward me, arms outstretched. I didn't say anything at first, allowing her to envelop me in a hug. She whispered into my ear, "I'm glad you're here, Dad. But you look... I mean, you're fine. You're fine. It's just, well, this crowd. You know how they can be." She pulled back, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear nervously, her eyes flickering to her in-laws who were already glancing over at us with a mix of curiosity and judgment. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said quietly, giving her a reassuring smile. "It's just a little different than what I'm used to. That's all." But even as I spoke those words, I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, the judgment lurking beneath their smiles. I noticed Serenity and Palmer standing near the bar, talking with a couple who wore clothes that looked more expensive than anything I owned. Serenity, in her crisp dress, barely acknowledged me, her gaze flicking over my appearance with that same dismissive look I'd seen so many times. Richard, ever the mediator, was busy chatting with someone else, but his quick glance at me was enough. The tension was thick, and I could feel the distance between me and everyone else in the room. The walls felt too close, and every breath seemed to echo louder in the silence between us. Then, as I stood there trying to gather myself, Richard cleared his throat and walked toward me. "You're here, at least," he said, though his words lacked any real warmth. His eyes flicked briefly to Rachel, then back to me. "I suppose we should get started. We can't have Serenity's birthday delayed because of, well, anything." The tone in his voice left no room for misunderstanding. It was an unspoken reminder that I didn't belong here, that I wasn't part of this world. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had helped Lauren, a stranger on the highway, without hesitation or expectation. And yet here I was, being made to feel like an intruder for showing up for family. I forced myself to keep my head high, despite the dissonance growing inside. "Let's go," I said, with a calm I didn't feel, trying to hold on to the last shred of my dignity. Rachel hesitated, her face softening with concern, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The pull between the family she married into and the father she loved. She stepped forward, putting a hand on my arm. "I'm so glad you're here," she said again, quieter this time. Her voice carried something I couldn't quite place: guilt, perhaps, or maybe it was just her own uncertainty. We moved toward the dining table, my heart sinking with each step. I wasn't sure I could hold my ground in this battle of appearances, but I would try. For Rachel, for the woman who had always seen the best in me, even when no one else did. As we reached the table, I glanced back at Serenity, who looked at me with barely concealed distaste. And just like that, I knew I didn't belong here. Not really, but it wasn't about them. It was about Rachel. So, I smiled, the same smile I had worn for years, hiding everything I felt, and I sat at the table, knowing that tonight I wasn't going to win any approval from these people, but I had shown up, and that was enough for me. The dinner table was set, the silverware gleaming in the soft lighting, but the tension hung thick in the air. Rachel sat beside me, her knee brushing against mine, as though her presence could shield me from the storm that was gathering around us. The faces across from us were a study in forced civility, but beneath the well-practiced smiles, I could feel the sharp edge of their judgment. Serenity's gaze lingered on me, calculating, cold, like I was an artifact of a bygone era. Misplaced in this polished world of wealth and status, the meal began with small talk that felt like nothing more than background noise. The kind of chatter that people make when they're pretending not to notice the elephant in the room. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but I refused to shrink back. My thoughts drifted, and I focused on the simple act of eating, cutting my food, chewing, swallowing, anything to keep myself grounded in the moment. But as the evening wore on, the words that had been whispered between Rachel and me earlier began to settle in my chest like stones. There was no real comfort here. Not for me. For all the polite gestures, the thin layer of pleasantries, I was the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Richard, never one to let an opportunity for a subtle jab slip by, who began to ask me questions. Each one a quiet challenge. He was probing, testing, as if my presence here was an inconvenience he had to endure. What exactly do you do? Donald. His voice was a little too loud, a little too calculated. As he sipped his wine, I looked at him, meeting his gaze head on. I fix things, I said simply. Cars. Mostly. I help people who need it. It was the truth, even if it didn't fit the narrative of success that was so highly valued here. Richard's lip curled slightly, and I could see the disdain flicker in his eyes, the unspoken judgment that clung to every word he spoke. I see. Helping people with cars. How charming. Before I could respond, Lauren Whitfield's voice cut through the tension, clear and composed, like a blade slicing through the quiet. Charming, she raised an eyebrow, her eyes locking onto Richard's. You call fixing something that's broken charming? She turned to me then, a slight smile on her lips. I've spent my life working with business leaders, investors, people who talk about profits and numbers. But it's people like you, Donald, who actually make the world work. The rest of us. She shook her head. We just talk about it. I didn't know what to say at first. Lauren had turned the entire room's attention toward her, her words cutting through the underlying tensions like a knife through butter. She wasn't speaking to me out of politeness. It was genuine respect, the kind I hadn't heard in years. It was a relief, a breath of fresh air in the suffocating atmosphere of this place. The weight of the evening lifted just a little, but serenity, clearly unsettled by Lauren's words, cleared her throat sharply, and her forced smile reappeared. Of course, Donald, I'm sure your work is quite practical, she said, her voice laced with that familiar edge. But here, we value certain standards, don't we? Palmer, who had been uncharacteristically silent until now, nodded slightly. His eyes were calculating, but I could see the unease beneath the surface. He had been cornered by Lauren's candidness, and the tension between them was palpable. They were trying to maintain control over the situation, but their attempts were slipping, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle cracks beginning to form in their carefully constructed walls. Lauren, however, wasn't done. She turned to Palmer and Serenity, her voice never wavering. Standards, she repeated. You know, I think it's the lack of standards that bothers me the most. People like Donald, who make things happen. I don't need to be measured by what they wear or where they come from. What matters is what they do. And I've seen more genuine character in one of Donald's toolboxes than I've seen in this room all evening. The room fell into a heavy silence, Even Rachel, who had been trying to smooth things over, seemed taken aback by the shift in tone, but it wasn't uncomfortable for me. In fact, it felt like the first real conversation I'd had in this house. A conversation that wasn't about appearances, but about real value, something I could finally stand behind. I met Lauren's gaze, a silent gratitude passing between us. And as the evening continued, it became clear to me that, despite all the wealth and grandeur surrounding us, it wasn't those things that mattered. It was the quiet strength of honesty, of standing up for what's right, even when it's not the easy thing to do. And for the first time all evening, I felt like I had a place in this room, not because of what I wore or who I knew, but because I had the one thing that mattered most: integrity. And just like that, I knew that this dinner wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about surviving the test, about showing up in the face of adversity and standing firm in who I was. As the evening stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something I had longed for but never fully understood. Lauren's words still echoed in my mind. Character matters. It wasn't just a simple truth. It was the kind of truth that could break a room wide open and expose everything underneath. The table was quieter now. Serenity, who had once prided herself on holding court at gatherings like these, seemed deflated, as if the air had been sucked out of her inflated sense of control. Palmer, ever the businessman, was staring at his plate, his hand tight around his wine glass. He tried to salvage the atmosphere, but his voice lacked its usual command. Like a broken record, struggling to find its rhythm. Rachel's hand was still resting on mine, though I could feel her fingers tremble slightly. She was fighting with something inside herself, perhaps the same battle I had fought for years, the tug of family loyalty, the fear of choosing sides when you couldn't bear to disappoint anyone. But tonight, for once, she wasn't fighting it alone. Lauren had given her the space to breathe, to see the situation for what it truly was. The contrast was clear now, and the divide between the two worlds, the world of pretense and perfection, and the world of genuine effort, of the kind of work that required getting your hands dirty, the kind of work that built something that could stand on its own. I had never realized how suffocating that other world could be until tonight. I had been drowning in their expectations, pretending to fit in, to play the part that Rachel and everyone else seemed to demand, but now I was no longer interested in their rules. I looked at Lauren, who had settled into her seat with an air of quiet confidence. She wasn't judging the Thompsons. Not really. She was simply standing up for what was right, what I was too scared to stand up for before. She made me realize something in that moment. It wasn't about showing up and trying to be accepted. It was about accepting myself. Flaws, imperfections, and all. Donald. Lauren's voice broke through my thoughts, calm yet firm. How about we have a drink? Her gaze was steady. But there was something else in it, a kind of understanding that only comes from someone who had seen the kind of struggle I had, the kind of quiet resilience that didn't need validation, only respect. I nodded, grateful for her offer, and we both stood. The rest of the table watched us as we made our way to the bar, the tension still hanging thick in the air, but I didn't care anymore. For the first time, I realized that their stares, their judgments, didn't matter. As I settled into the chair across from Lauren, I couldn't help but smile. Not at her, but at the realization that I had learned something tonight. I had been living my life on the edge of their expectations, constantly fighting for a seat at the table where I never truly belonged. But now, I was sitting at my own table, and it was bigger than all of theirs combined. To new beginnings, Lauren said, raising her glass. Her eyes met Mina, and I knew she wasn't just toasting to the end of an awkward evening. She was toasting to the change that was happening, to the change in me. I clinked my glass against hers. The sound sharp and clear, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk now, and no one could take that from me. Rachel joined us soon after, her face flushed with something that looked like hope, but also relief. I smiled at her, knowing that she, too, had seen the truth, the one that had been hiding in plain sight all along. And with that, I made a promise to myself, a promise to keep walking this path. No matter how much they tried to pull me back into their world, it was time to stop pretending, to stop bending to their standards, and to finally build my own life, my own happiness. Thank you, I whispered to Lauren, so quietly that only she could hear. She smiled, the kind of smile that told me she didn't need any words to understand. And as the evening carried on, with the air heavy with the echoes of what had just transpired, I knew one thing for sure: I was done apologizing for who I was. As the evening progressed, I could feel the weight of everything that had happened slowly settling into me. The awkwardness of the dinner, the confrontation, and the words spoken, it was all too much to process in real time. But something about the way Lauren had handled herself, the calm yet unwavering authority she exuded, made me think differently. She didn't need to scream to make a point. She didn't need to fight dirty. She just stood her ground. And in doing so, she had changed everything for me. I found myself replaying the events over and over in my head. The way Serenity had cut me down in front of everyone, her cruel words echoing in the stillness of the room, and then Rachel stepping between us, her voice full of desperation. I had always believed she was on my side, but tonight it felt like she was just as lost in their world as I had been. But then came Lauren, and everything shifted. Her unwavering stance against their superficiality, that's what made the difference. Sitting there now, I realized just how much I had been holding on to, pretending everything was fine, when it wasn't. I had spent so many years pretending to fit into their world, accepting their judgments, their silent critiques, and in return, I had built a facade, a version of myself that was more about what they expected than who I truly was. But now, it all seemed so trivial, so unnecessary. Lauren's presence had peeled away the layers of discomfort that had been building inside me for years. For the first time, I felt free, free to be myself. Free from the expectations of people who didn't even see the real me. As I sat there, the weight of the moment slowly lifted, and I realized that I didn't need their approval to feel validated. "Donald," Lauren said, her voice gentle but firm. I looked up at her, my eyes meeting hers, and she gave me a small, encouraging smile. "You know," she continued, "it's not about them. It's about you. You've spent so much of your life giving, trying to fit in, trying to be the person they wanted you to be. But what about you? What do you want?" The question hit me like a sudden revelation. I had been so consumed by their world that I had forgotten to ask myself what I wanted, what I truly needed. The conversation had shifted from the formalities of dinner to something deeper, something that resonated with me on a level I hadn't realized I was missing. I had spent so many years bending over backward to please others, to keep the peace in a family that didn't appreciate me. But here was Lauren, a woman who had only known me for a few hours, and yet she saw something in me that no one in that room had ever acknowledged: my worth. "I think you've been looking for approval from the wrong people," Lauren continued. Her words, though simple, rang with a clarity that felt almost like a relief. It's time to stop. It's time to reclaim your voice, or your life. And when you do, everything else will follow. I sat back, letting her words sink in. For the first time, I realized I didn't need their approval to move forward. I didn't need them to validate me, to give me permission to live the way I wanted to. I could do it on my own terms, with my own strength. Lauren's words became a turning point for me, a catalyst that pushed me into a new chapter of my life. I was done pretending, done letting others dictate my worth. As we sat there, I could feel the change within me, like a shift that was happening deep down. And though the evening had been painful in many ways, I knew it had been the push I needed to let go of the past, to let go of their judgment, and to finally step into my own truth. I looked at Lauren and smiled. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, filled with gratitude. She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're welcome, Donald. Now, it's your turn to live your truth." And as I walked out of that house later that evening, with Lauren beside me, I knew that I was walking into a new future, one where I finally understood the importance of being true to myself. As the car pulled away from the Thompson house, I felt a strange sense of liberation, almost as though I had been freed from a prison I hadn't known I was in. The weight of years of pretenses, the quiet struggles, the constant need to prove my worth to people who never truly saw me, it was all behind me now. Yet, there was still something nagging at me, a lingering feeling I couldn't shake off. It wasn't just the unfairness of what had happened, or the humiliation I'd endured at the hands of the Thompsons. It was the realization that, in many ways, I had let it happen for far too long. Lauren, sitting beside me in the passenger seat, seemed to sense my unease. She turned to me with a soft, reassuring smile. "You're not going to let this define you, Donald. You've already shown them what real strength looks like." Her words cut through the fog of my thoughts. She was right. I didn't have to let this moment, however painful, be the one that shaped my future. I had the power to choose what mattered, to walk away from the toxicity, and to redefine who I was, regardless of what anyone else thought. I glanced over at Lauren, feeling a sudden surge of gratitude, not just for her help at the dinner, but for the way she had reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten, that there was still goodness in the world, and that real relationships were built on respect, not status or appearances. Lauren wasn't like the Thompsons. She saw me, not as a mechanic or a man out of place, but as someone with value, someone who deserved to be treated with dignity. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion, "for everything tonight, for standing up for me." She nodded, her expression softening. "You didn't need me to defend you, Donald. You've always had that strength. But sometimes it takes someone else to remind us of it." I smiled, feeling the first stirrings of relief since I had stepped into the Thompson house earlier that evening. The tension that had clung to me like a heavy coat for so long was starting to lift, piece by piece. I wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but I knew it was the right one. I had never been more certain of my own worth. As we continued down the road, the evening's events played through my mind in fragments, but the anger, the embarrassment, the hurt, all of it felt distant now. I was moving forward. Not just physically, but emotionally. I was done with the Thompsons, and I was done with pretending to be someone I wasn't, for anyone. The drive took us out of the quiet, suburban streets and into the bustling heart of the city. I noticed the difference in the way I was viewing the world. Now everything seemed brighter, clearer. more vibrant. The city lights reflected off the pavement, the steady hum of life surrounding us. It was all so different from the stifling atmosphere of the party, where everything had felt fake, like it was just a performance. When we reached the restaurant, Lauren and I sat down to a simple meal, nothing grand or pretentious, just good food and honest conversation. The kind of meal that felt like the beginning of something real. And as I looked across the table at Lauren, I realized that this was exactly what I had been missing: connection, authenticity, and the willingness to be seen for who I really was. It wasn't about impressing anyone or fitting into a mold. It was about being true to myself. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I was at peace. Tonight didn't just change things for you, Donald, Lauren said, breaking my thoughts. It's also changed me. You've reminded me of what really matters, being true to yourself. No matter what. I think we both needed this. I couldn't help but agree. It had been a long time since I had felt this free. The future, for the first time, felt full of possibilities, not obstacles. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make me believe that the best was yet to come. As we sat there in the warmth of the restaurant, the evening's tension slowly started to melt away, replaced by an almost surreal calm. The world outside seemed to buzz with energy, but in this small corner of the diner, it was just Lauren and me. The clink of cutlery, the soft murmur of other patrons, everything felt like a distant hum, as though we were in a world of our own. Lauren's words from earlier still echoed in my mind, reminding me of what I had almost forgotten: that strength didn't always have to be loud or forceful. Sometimes, the keenest voice, the one that stood its ground without shouting, was the one that carried the most power. And that's what I had done tonight. I had stood my ground, not by confronting anyone, but by walking away, by refusing to let their judgment define me anymore. I had let go of something bigger than just that evening. I had let go of the need for approval. Lauren's gaze softened as she met my eyes across the table. You're quiet now. Donald, are you okay? I nodded, a faint smile tugging at my lips. I'm more than okay. I think I'm starting to understand something I've been missing for a long time. I've spent so much of my life trying to make other people see me the way I thought they should, instead of just being myself. Lauren tilted her head slightly, as though pondering my words. I think that's something we all do. Whether we realize it or not, we get so caught up in how others perceive us that we forget what it feels like to just exist without needing validation. And then we're left feeling invisible. But you're not invisible, Donald. Not to me. The sincerity in her voice settled over me like a blanket, wrapping me in warmth. I had been invisible for so long, at least to the people who mattered most. It was a strange feeling to have someone truly see you, not for your status, not for your wealth, but for who you were as a person. It felt like I was shedding layers of armor I hadn't even realized I'd been wearing. As we finished our meal and sipped our drinks, the conversation shifted. We talked about the future, about things that mattered to us. And slowly, the weight of the night's events began to dissolve. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The world outside no longer felt as daunting, as if I were walking in the shadows of someone else's expectations. I could breathe again. We paid the bill, and as we stepped out into the crisp night air, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't known I was missing. Lauren's presence beside me was a reminder of something fundamental: that sometimes the people you least expect to encounter can show you the way back to yourself. I think this is where I'm supposed to be, I said quietly, more to myself than to Lauren. It's been a long time coming, but I'm finally starting to believe it. She smiled, her eyes warm. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that the road ahead was mine to walk on my own terms. You're exactly where you need to be. Donald, she replied, her voice full of understanding. And from here, everything will look different. As we parted ways that night, something inside me clicked into place. The pain of the past had given way to a new understanding, a new perspective. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. In the end, it wasn't about the Thompsons or their judgment. It wasn't about whether I fit into their world. What mattered was the truth. I had learned tonight the only validation I needed was my own. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful realization of all. As I stepped out into the night, the cool breeze felt different, now refreshing, almost cleansing. The streetlights flickered faintly, casting long shadows on the pavement as I made my way to my car. It was a simple car, old, reliable, and decidedly out of place in the polished world of Worthington Hills. But as I slid into the driver's seat, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. The evening had unfolded in a way I never expected. Yet somehow, it felt like the only way it could have. The tension from the Thompson dinner was still fresh in my mind. But now it seemed like an old wound, one that had finally begun to heal. I had walked away, not just from their judgment, but from the years of trying to conform to a world that never truly accepted me. And in that moment, I realized something profound that I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before I was enough. Lauren's presence had been a turning point, a catalyst for a shift in my own understanding of who I was and what I deserved. She saw me. She didn't look at me through the lens of class, wealth, or social standing. She simply saw me. That clarity made everything else fade into the background. The Thompsons, with their wealth and judgment, their petty cruelties, they no longer mattered. As I drove through the quiet streets of the city, I couldn't help but think about Rachel. My daughter had always been the bridge between me and that world, her world. The world of expectations, appearances, and social obligation. But tonight, I had seen her in a new light. The tears in her eyes, and the way she had stepped between me and her family, it was clear she was torn between two worlds, trying to balance loyalty to her husband and a love for her father that ran deeper than all the superficialities that had threatened to tear us apart. I thought back to the look on her face when I had left the Thompson household. I had seen her distress, but I had also seen something else, a shift. She wasn't the same young woman who had once tried so hard to make everything fit neatly into the boxes the world had built for her. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see that those boxes were made to be broken. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, breaking my thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. The simple text read, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. But I need you to know I love you. I'll figure it out. Please don't give up on me." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just an apology. It was a plea for understanding. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't the one who needed to fix things. I needed to let her find her own way. To learn that it was okay to stand up for what was right, even if it meant breaking away from the chains that held her. I typed back, my fingers steady as I hit send. "I never gave up on you. Rachel, I never will. But we both have to learn when to let go of what holds us back. Love you too." With a deep breath, I set the phone down. The weight of the past few hours felt less heavy now, as though a burden had been lifted. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward a future where I could finally live my truth. As I turned onto the freeway, the city lights stretching before me, I felt a renewed sense of possibility. The road ahead was uncertain. Yes, but it was mine to drive. And this time, I wasn't doing it alone. The drive back home felt different now, as if the city around me had softened into something more familiar, more forgiving. The weight of the past few days, the humiliation at the Thompson dinner, the quiet strength that Lauren had given me, was slowly being replaced by a sense of clarity. I had always thought that the louder the world demanded you be, the stronger you had to appear in response. But tonight, I'd learned something different. Strength didn't have to shout. Sometimes, the greatest power was in choosing to remain silent when the world was filled with noise. As I turned off the highway and onto the road that led to my apartment, I couldn't help but think of Rachel again. Her message lingered in my mind, an unspoken promise of reconciliation, of hope. I love you, Dad. It was a simple phrase, but in the context of everything that had happened, it felt like a declaration of peace. I realized that I hadn't just walked away from the Thompsons. I had walked away from years of trying to prove myself worthy to a world that would never see me as anything other than an outsider. And in doing so, I had finally allowed myself to be enough. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed the quiet of the night around me, the faint hum of the city in the distance. The world was still turning, whether I was in it or not. The apartment complex looked the same, modest, a little worn, but in that moment, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and stop pretending. I had spent so many years trying to fit into spaces I didn't belong, but I didn't need to do that anymore. I grabbed my coat and stepped out of the car, my fingers lingering on the door handle. The cold night air felt crisp against my face, grounding me in the present. I walked slowly to my apartment, each step a reminder of how far I'd come. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to please anyone anymore. I could be myself. Once inside, I set my keys on the counter, the silence in the room settling over me like an old friend. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities. I sank into my favorite chair, the one Martha used to sit in, and closed my eyes for a moment. The apartment didn't feel small anymore. It felt like mine. I didn't need the grand gestures, the fancy parties, or the approval of people who had never understood me. I only needed the quiet strength to live life on my own terms. As I sat there, the phone buzzed again. Rachel had sent another message. I know we have a lot to work through, but I'm ready to start. Let's take this one step at a time. Dad? A small smile tugged at my lips. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was ours to walk together. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about building something new. And this time, it would be built on honesty, on love, and on the understanding that we were enough. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the world finally lifting. The lesson was clear. You don't have to live up to anyone else's expectations to be worthy. The only standard that matters is the one you set for yourself. And as the night stretched on, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is simply showing up for yourself, without apologies, without regret. Life wasn't about the destinations we reached. It was about the journey, the small moments that built us up, and the people we chose to share them with. And for the first time in a long while, I was excited to see where my journey would take me next. The lesson I had learned tonight was simple, yet profound. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to stand still and know that you are enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.